Hey everyone, integrating real perspective film review corner once again. And how about this? I'm reviewing the second Monsterverse movie on the same day as Jing Tian's 36th birthday. Well, okay, so this review is obviously um happening after the fact, but it was July 21st that uh, Jing Tian celebrated her 36th birthday. She plays San Lin in this movie, who is a biologist working for Monarch. Pretty important character to this otherwise American cast film. And pretty obvious, though, that despite the setting for this film being 1973, post-Vietnam War, she was a catalyst to show that this movie was going to launch off the Monsterverse franchise officially. If you want to know what I mean by that, just check out the post-credit scene and you'll see how Kong actually fits into this mythology along with Godzilla. So, anyways, Kong Skull Island, the second Monsterverse movie in the franchise, is a very colorful and vibrant movie that follows 3 years after Godzilla, 2017, obviously. And in some ways, it shows the origins of Monarch as it became an official government agency during the Nixon era. Certainly a movie that reflects the political greed of the times. It's also the first movie ever to finally make me a King Kong fan. I wasn't ever really the biggest fan of the big ape growing up. I never understood the hype of the original 1933 film, though I will respect it for being the first mainstream movie to feature a giant titan on screen. And it's Willis O'Brien who did the special effects, the stop motion effects for that film, who was the teacher of Ray Harryhausen, another prestigious figure in the history of special effects that I look up to and praise to this day. I actually have a book of Ray Harryhausen's that he gave to me when I was 9 years old when I sent a fan letter to him, which I then got back, and he signed thank you on it, and he signed his name inside the book. He signed his autograph along with the inscription to John with gratitude and best wishes. So that's a pretty titanic moment in my life as far as my love for cinema growing up. So it's so I can in fact respect the 1933 film, even though seeing King Kong die at the end is just really depressing. I did also see King Kong Lives from 1986 as a kid, and I thought that film was terrible, despite it featuring Linda Hamilton. I never saw the Jeff Bridges movie from 1976, never saw the Peter Jackson movie from 2005. So, I mean, but anyways, Kong Skull Island, however, takes a different route than previous renditions of the franchise, including the original. For one thing, Kong doesn't die, which has tended to be the case for virtually every movie he's in, save for maybe King Kong versus Godzilla from 1962, although that depends on whether you're watching the Japanese or the USA version. For another, this film establishes Kong as a god and begins exploring the Hollow Earth myth, which would become more developed in later Monsterverse entries. And third, this movie is just plain damn fun. 2014's Godzilla was a rather melancholy flick, but Kong Skull Island is hot, sweaty, animalistic fun with a stellar cast of Tom Hiddleston, John Goodman, Brie Larson, Samuel L. Jackson, Shea Wiggum. Even John C. Reilly is great here, and I usually cannot stand that actor. But here, he's actually given a more candid performance that eschews his usual stupid frat boy humor antics in much of his films. As with the 2014 Godzilla film, Kong Skull Island gives birth to another famous line that has become canon in the Monsterverse franchise, which is monsters exist. This is the line that John Goodman's character Bill Randa uses when he discovers an island that is off the coast of Indonesia, but hidden from mapping systems. Basically, a similar myth to the Bermuda Triangle. Basically, back in the 1970s, even then, Monarch was ridiculed for its outlandish theories and historical findings of monsters. The government thinks that they're wasting their funding, that they're wasting their funding on Monarch. It's really fascinating to watch how current events of a specific time period shape the unknown events that happen in the world around us. If you remember the opening quote from the 1962 King Kong versus Godzilla, the US version, the line, there are more things in heaven and on earth that are dreamt of in your philosophy, which I think is Shakespeare, if I recall correctly. Based off that quote, Monarch is a fringe agency that specializes in the cryptozoology and corresponding myths of the titans that ruled the earth that prove that humanity's own philosophies are tiny compared to the myths that the titans used to run their show, to practice their own cosmologies. So Monarch basically is speaking for the monsters, the titans, their own philosophies, their beliefs that they have used to run the world around them. Now, these titans have sentience and their own belief systems, and they generate the forces that make the earth spin, something that would begin to be talked about when the hollow earth theory is discussed. And I'll be tying that into the main characters right now. So Randa recruits a band of people from Samuel L. Jackson playing an Army lieutenant colonel named Preston Packard to Tom Hiddleston playing a tracker named James Conrad who can orient himself in any environment and sense out where the wild things are. To Brie Larson playing Mason Weaver, who is a reporter journalist that can take pictures and document the story as it unfolds for Monarch to then create a case file around it. And she's one of the characters that's actually talked down to by Samuel L. Jackson's character, who tells her that she's the reason why we lost the war or something like that. Basically, he has a grudge against photographers in general. And some of these people come from international locations. Hiddleston's character is staying in Shanghai, for example. Now, soon after the team arrives on Skull Island, is where we're treated to the single coolest usage of Black Sabbath's Paranoid, which splices together the power chord rhythm with the deep swooshing sounds of the helicopter blades to great effect. The stomping low pass filter mixes so well with the helicopter blades spinning, that that it becomes its own remix, essentially. And while this happens, soldiers are dropping seismic explosives so as to map out the terrain. There's a geologist tagging along named Houston Brooks who engineered the explosions so as to test the hollow earth theory. He's seen with Randa at the beginning of the film as well, serving as his partner in research with Monarch. Fun fact, by the way, for those who have seen the 2019 King of the Monsters film, Joe Morton has a cameo playing an older Houston Brooks for just 30 to 60 seconds. Boy, was that ever a fun cameo to see him in that film. I mean, my goodness. We're talking the guy that played Dr. Miles Bennett Dyson in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The guy who played Captain Herb Mac McMahon in both of the Speed movies. That guy has been around forever. And I gotta say, it was a lot of fun seeing him in this movie. Oh, I see he was in Dragonfly too. I gotta see that movie one of these days. The hollow earth theory posits that Earth terraformed beneath the surface and gradually rose up from there. Hence why Randa calls Skull Island at the beginning of the film the land where God did not finish creation. Hence why these seismic charges are being dropped by the Army helicopters to discover that the ground really is hollow underneath. Hollow Earth isn't really a new cinematic concept. In fact, there are many different mythologies about what the Hollow Earth is. Dante's Inferno, well, that was one for version of Hollow Earth. The way that he mapped out the nine different levels of hell. Well, Giacomo Casanova's Icosumerian was an 1800-page story about Hollow Earth that was done in the same fashion as Gulliver's Travels, where a brother and a sister who fall into the earth discover the subterranean utopia of Mega McCary's, I'm obviously pronouncing it wrong. I'll have to do more research on this book one of these days. But they are a race of multicolored hermaphroditic dwarves. They're called the Mega McRace. Yeah, I'll provide the spelling of that word obviously in the captions below. But then there's the most popular adaptation of Hollow Earth in Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, which has been adapted to film several times, including one from 2008 with Brendan Fraser. By the way, but the way Kong Skull Island begins to introduce Hollow Earth is intriguing. The helicopters dropping bombs on the island's surface terrain implies that the seismic vibrations are going to reveal whether the Earth is truly hollow and what kinds of rock formations are inside the Earth's core, thereby showing the topography. And Skull Island is really just one location, as there also happen to be many subterranean tunnels around the globe that have yet to be discovered. And then there are the skull crawlers. Oh, yeah, the skull crawlers, which are the creatures that live below the Earth's surface that are a danger to the island's indigenous tribe, the Iwi. And the Iwi are first introduced in this film, which establishes their relationship with Kong, who is their god and protector of the island, who also keeps nature in balance by exterminating the skull crawlers. So you can begin to see how the theme of nature balancing itself continues from the 2014 Godzilla film, just now that the myth has shifted with Kong being the focus. And finally, speaking of Kong, we are introduced to the big ape right away at the beginning of the film. While you only got a glimpse of Godzilla through archive footage, here Kong marks a more obvious presence right away within the first 2 minutes of the film. where we see a young Hank Marlow is seen stranded on a deserted shoreline where his plane crashes and is soon pursued by a Japanese pilot named Gunpei Ikari, who eventually the two engage in a close combat until Kong emerges on the scene. You see the two fighting each other on the edge of a cliff. And in fact, this is where Hank Marlowe grabs onto the samurai sword that Gunpei uses to try to impale him, and ends up, slicing his hands in the process. You're going to see that later on too when I talk about Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, when Kong is battling the Scar King. So many parallels here. And so then King Kong here emerges on the edge of that cliff and appears like he's going to kill these two men until the action is interrupted by the title and the opening credits rolling. But it turns out not to be the case because Hank is taken to the iwi who provides shelter for him. And he actually becomes friends with Gunpei at that point. I guess the iwi had somehow pacified him, and when he was taken care of, uh, basically Gunpei and him had resolved their differences together. There must have been like some initial conflicts between nations at the time, since I figured there's got to be some overlapping here with the Hiroshima bombings that took place around the same time as the 2014 Godzilla film. But they became friends, and Gunpei, of course, would eventually die, and leaving leaving Marlow all by himself. So this takes place in 1944 when World War II is going on. Hank is an American pilot who worked for the Air Force 45th Squadron, who, after Gunpei passes away, he ends up living alone for 29 years until Monarch and their team arrive on the island shortly after the Vietnam War in 1973. Now, it is interesting to take note here that Kong's role in this movie is modeled after Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, which interestingly I watched for the first time the same year Kong Skull Island hit theaters. It's pretty obvious when Kong appears later on in the film when he begins throwing the first tree to strike down the helicopters, dropping the seismic charges. And it becomes obvious right away that the big ape is defending his territory. Yeah. He is essentially the Princess Mononoke of this movie. And Samuel L. Jackson's Preston Picard is the Lady Eboshi of this movie, except that while Mononoke was a human wearing wolf's clothing, Kong is an actual god. But the intents are roughly the same. The intentions are roughly the same. Mononoke was defending the spirit realm, the wolves, by waging war against Irontown. So there's an environmentalist theme going on there about pollution and contaminating the land, whereas Kong in the Skull Island movie is defending his spirit realm, the Iwi, from the military. The military, of course, believe that their mission is to protect humanity from knowing that monsters and titans exist. And you'll actually notice that the creatures in this film, the skull crawlers and such, definitely model after the creatures in Princess Mononoke, like the Kodami, those little white, like bobblehead type creatures that spin their heads around in sort of almost like a gear sort of fashion, and they just have holes for eyes and a mouth. Those, I really like those creatures. I love that movie too. I really love Princess Mononoke. Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, back to Skull Island. So I was just checking out Wikipedia, the entry here, where the section on creature design, uh, I thought was really, really interesting to point out here because it is, in fact, connected to Princess Mononoke. According to the director of this film, Jordan Vogt Roberts, he said that Princess Mononoke helped influence the monster's design and approach. Vogt Roberts stated Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke was actually a big reference in the way that the spirit creatures sort of have their own domains and fit within that. So, a big thing was trying to design creatures that felt realistic and could exist in an ecosystem that feels sort of wild and out there. And then also design things that simultaneously felt beautiful and horrifying at the same time. The two-armed pit lizard from the 1933 King Kong film was used as a reference for the skull crawlers. They were also inspired by a number of other cinematic creatures. Vogt Roberts stated that creature, beyond being a reference to a creature from the 1933 film, is also this crazy fusion of all the influences throughout my life, like the first angel from Evangelion, and No Face from Spirited Away, and Cubone from Pokemon. I can see the Cubone reference right there. Again, the Kodama kind of um the Cubone looked like an offshoot of the Kodama. I was just thinking about another franchise that I strongly believe is connected to the Monsterverse films, and those are the Meg movies with Jason Statham. So I was actually just watching both the Meg and its sequel, Meg 2, The Trench, and was just thinking about how in the second one, there's this mining operation where Jason Statham's character Jonas and Juming lead a routine submersible exploration for the trench, and that the Mana One is observing them during this time, and the expedition comes across creatures that similarly look very, very beautiful, but as it turns out, some of them are really savage. It's like the whole trench area has this beautiful, like, lava lamp look to it, in that every form of life just glows with this beautiful neon beauty to it. But then at one point, like, one of the members, I think his name was Lance, gets eaten up by one of these creatures that just at first you think it's a coral reef, as I think it is. I can't find any information on any Wikipedia sites about that, but it just made me think about that. And, as a matter of fact, the Meg movies are going to be referenced quite a bit in upcoming Monsterverse entries. So just stay tuned to that. I can definitely assure you that there's a crossbreeding of these two worlds, even though the Meg movies were partially inspired by the Jaws franchise. So, as a matter of fact, Let's look at Tom Hiddleston and Brie Larson's characters to expand on that subject. So both Jason Conrad and Mason Weaver, Hiddleston and Larson's characters, have an unspoken romance in this film that stands in dark contrast to opportunist Bill Randa and militant aggressor Preston Packard, with his Captain Ahab, um, all personification. If you notice the scene where the two are sitting on a ledge looking at the northern lights, they talk about how the most dangerous places in the world are where the most beautiful sights happen. Jason, being a tracker, knows the importance of hiding but staying oriented with his target, sometimes with the intent to kill it, and other times to simply communicate with it and start a courtship or a friendship with. And I figure that he was doing this when with Mason, albeit with subtlety. Mason's love for images and her work as a photographer plays into this very nicely, since she is his eye that sees the beauty hidden behind the ugliness within the wild environment. It's simply about attuning to it and having a conversation with it so as to then make peace with it. Like when Kong appears and she attracts him close enough to touch him on the lip. It's a rather sweet scene. And yet, there is still a distance between these two, as well as Kong, so as to honor each other's integrity, yet just the same, rather than getting too absorbed in emotions that otherwise cause the characters to lose awareness of their mission. That's definitely another thing that separates this from any of the other King Kong movies, is just this respect for what is wild and beautiful, which I feel like the other Kong movies didn't do. Like there is always this, this both this absorption and fear into what's beautiful that often inspires um people to fuck around with it, basically. And Kong is like the personification of all that is beautiful and wild, which is unfortunately why he always ends up dying in the end. And he doesn't in this movie. He ends up coming out as the supreme victor in the end, especially with what he does to Samuel L. Jackson's character. Oh boy, is he really in for it. Now, John Goodman, meanwhile, well, what is there to say that likely hasn't been said? This man is a titan in his own role as Bill Randa, which I find to be a perfect counterpoint to his role in 10 Cloverfield Lane, except that his methods of manipulation to get other people to follow him on his mission to discover Skull Island isn't driven by paranoia, but just restless wanderlust and curiosity and a pursuit of the truth that unfortunately gets him killed off by one of the skull crawlers in the end. And speaking of Kong, the man that plays him, that would be Terry Notary, who has also had film credits which include Avatar, and that's the James Cameron film, not the TV series. He's also been in Peter Jackson's Hobbit franchise, so there's an obvious trace of his experience in fantasy and science fiction, which show his mark in playing Kong. So he definitely carries himself with Kong in a way that is a little bit more humanistic, not so machine-like and determined and stoic the way that Godzilla is. And I mean, you can watch interviews of the behind the scenes on the Blu-ray to find that that people who love Kong are definitely more of the romantic types as opposed to the ones who love Godzilla, who are just like the badass, yeah, smash them all up type of people. But yeah, so then there's really the only thing to talk about then is the ending. And this is the pre and the post credits parts of the ending. So in the pre credits, Hank Marlow manages to get off the island. Okay, so the credits are actually playing alongside um, this film projection screen of Hank Marlowe reuniting with his wife and son in a very, very candid moment. And then you see him sitting down, drinking a beer and watching a baseball game, just finally getting back into life again and connecting with humanity once again. It's the post-credits scene, though, where the big reveal about Monarch comes to light. And that's when Jason and Mason are sitting in an interrogation room awaiting to be briefed. Some of the few survivors from Skull Island. And clearly, Jason is ticked about the secrecy of his being contained, while Mason, in the meantime, is playing it cool. But both are obviously wondering if the whole trip to Skull Island was just some top secret mission that had to be kept under wraps. And they're concerned now that they're being deliberately kept in the dark so as to not leak out any information about that mission and the discovery of monsters existing. And that's when Monarch members Houston and San enter the room to tell them that Kong was only one of many titans that had been discovered around the globe, which basically culminates in film footage of cave paintings, which, yep, you guessed it. They contain Godzilla, King Ghidorah, and Mothra. So you can already guess now what's going to happen next, that this is a to be continued moment. But we'll obviously leave it here for now, as this is a story that's best continued with the next entry in the Monsterverse series. And so, with that being said, that is my review for Kong Skull Island from 2017. A very, very delightful treat of a movie to watch. It gives you an experience that the 2014 Godzilla movie didn't, for sure. It really does stand on its own and is its own entity, and makes for really great fodder when, both Godzilla and Kong's universes merge together later on in the franchise. So, anyways, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review. Shout out to my good old buddies at Mega Media Exchange in Brookfield, as always. Love you as always. Best friends forever. And check out my links below for ISTA. This is a Tantra school that I am looking to visit out in Arizona. And if you are so moved to actually tip me at all on any of these videos, just let me know. I would appreciate any money that I can, raise for the content that I create so that I can take a trip out to Arizona and visit this ISTA school, because I want to get deeper into the teachings of Tantra and sacred sexuality. Yeah. So, all right. I think you know that my next film review is going to be Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019. So stay tuned and see you on the flip side of the reel, as always, my fellow reelers. Integrating real perspective out, and ciao.